Hello and welcome to Sounding Board, a community access television production of Seroptimus International of Novato. My name is Madeline Peters and I serve as the moderator for today's program, which is Child Abduction, the Perils of Being a Parent in the 21st Century. But before I have our guests introduce themselves, just the mission of Seroptimus is improving the lives of women and girls through programs leading to social and economic empowerment. Well, we're very fortunate today to have Linda Witong here and to have Chris Mahurin here. And I'm going to have you folks introduce yourselves. And just ahead of time, thank you very much for putting time in your schedule to be on our program. This is a very important topic. So Linda, a little bit about your illustrious background.
There you go. No, thank you for having us, because what we're talking about today is an important event. My background is I was a prosecutor in Marin County for over 32 years. I retired. I now work on a pro bono basis doing cold case investigations. I'm also a delegate to the United Nations in 2013, and again this year. As a matter of fact, next week I will go back to the United Nations as a delegate for the Commission on the Status of Women. In my background as a delegate, I learned, and as a DA, I learned firsthand about human trafficking and child abduction.
Well, again, thank you, because we're doing two programs today.
Yes,
this one, so thank you for telling us a little bit about your background. And Chris, how about you? A little bit about your background.
So I grew up in Sonoma County, in Petaluma, just across the Marin County line there. I've been a Santa Rosa police officer for about 8 years, and I've been doing domestic violence and sexual assault cases for about 3 years now. I have a collateral focus that works with children of child exploitation, so like catch predator kind of things, as well as human trafficking of both adults and of minors. I've been working these kinds of cases for almost my entire career, starting on patrol, really noticing an issue of prostitution that was happening on our streets and wanting to get a better understanding that happened with it. And as soon as I became a detective, I kind of started investigating more of the child abduction as well as the child exploitation and human trafficking cases.
Well, it's really a delight to have two such very, very talented, committed people here for this particular program. Just in terms of the key points, because we had a discussion in planning for today's talk on child abduction, that we really need to be aware. We need to be aware as parents, as family members, that child abduction is something we need to pay attention to as a parent. You know, you need to be aware of your family members. You need to be aware of strangers, and you need to be aware of the power of the internet. And Linda, I'm going to have you sort of set the stage for this conversation before we go to Chris and then talk a little bit more about this. So,
the
Linda.
Majority of child abductions, which can be up to 800,000 a year, are done by family members, relatives, estranged fathers and mothers. However, I'm going to concentrate on a small percentage, but a scary percentage, which involve stranger abductions. In both abductions that happen of children from the street or in a park area or even in a mall or in some cases even in a residence, the stranger abductions in those cases are usually by people who have studied the victim, believe it or not. The victim does not know them as a friend, but in many cases they've studied the victim's patterns, where they go. In some cases, like Elizabeth Smart, it was a workman in the house that knew her pattern when she was there, when she wasn't there. In cases of going to the mall or going and absconding with the child from a park or an otherwise rural area, they studied the pattern of travel of the child to and from home. Unfortunately, a lot of the stranger abductions from the street happen about a quarter of a mile from the residence.
That close.
A large percentage, that close. And within a very small time frame, when you're dealing with stranger abductions, the child will be killed, unlike abductions that don't involve strangers, which is why when a stranger abduction is suspected, the officers are on it immediately. immediately and do not stop until they find the child if possible, because time is of the essence. The other area that I wanted to bring up was internet. And there's some of the same patterns. Your predator online and internet will be studying his children very, very carefully as well. Children will give a lot of information on internet. It will be very easy for a predator to determine what their likes are, what their dislikes are. It will be very easy for a predator to determine their schedules even, and their location, because in many cases through internet, they can determine the exact location of the child. Once they know that, they can begin to determine, again, the child's pattern. What does the child do? Where does the child go? In many cases, what they'll also do is befriend the child and make the child feel that they're the only person that the child feels understands that particular victim. And they will try and solicit the child to come and meet them in an area just so they can finally meet. And the average age of a child who's abducted is around 11 to 14. And so a lot of the children that age aren't exactly fully developed when it comes to reasoning ability, and they may decide to go and actually meet this person because they think that this person really understands them. It used to be in California that we did not have a law about predators arranging a meeting. But several years ago, actually now it would be like 4, 5, 6 years ago at least, we changed the law so that we do not have to wait until the predator actually meets up with the child or actually absconds with the child. We can arrest them as they're going to walk to meet the victim.
Linda, you tell a very, very chilling story. So that's the reality. This is what's going on in terms of child abductions, as you said. There's the family members, the strangers, and the internet.
Right.
Chris, you're the feet on the ground, the detective. Would you share your perspective and your knowledge on this?
Linda's right. A lot of these cases nowadays do come from the internet when they're stranger abductions, primarily because children don't get an understanding of once they put something on the internet, it's not going away.
Right.
I do a lot of undercover operations that involve the internet and Facebook and all these other social media sites. When I set up an account, within roughly 2 hours, I can have 200 teenagers already being my friend on Facebook. They have no idea who I am, they don't ask any questions, but now I have access because we're friends. I could see their home addresses, their home phone numbers, and all these different personal information about them, where they go, where they check in at. So I know that they like to go to the mall on Tuesdays, so I know that if I go to the mall, I can see them there. It's very scary to see that. And a lot of times parents don't have the passwords or the information of the sites their children are looking at. And with mobile phones especially, you don't even need a computer anymore because they can do that while they're sitting at lunch at school or anywhere else. One of the other big problems that we're seeing now is we have such a large population of people moving to our area, and some of them are not primary English speakers. They're monolingual for Spanish or other languages. And while these parents are doing a great job of monitoring what sites their children may be on, if they're not understanding the conversations that the children are having with other people, the parents are doing a great job of saying, yeah, okay, I know my daughter is on Facebook or she's on Twitter or any of these things, and I can see the pictures and these people look nice, but really the conversation that they're having, sometimes they really just don't know.
Yeah, well, it's like, they don't know what's going on, and I hadn't even thought about that in terms of the added cultural language barrier too.
Yeah.
What you're bringing up is reminds me of some work one of my graduate students did. It was really educating middle school students on their digital footprint. And so what you're saying is these young people, especially as you said, the 11 to 14 age group, they don't understand the concept that once they put something on the internet, it's there forever. It's there forever. And so that, and now, you're setting the context for what kind of things can happen.
Right.
And as you said, even well-meaning parents who believe they are looking at...
vigilant.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. There's really don't know.
No.
They're perhaps the digital immigrants, where the children are the digital natives.
Yes.
Right.
So again, Chris, I know you've had a lot of cases and have a lot of information. So setting the stage is really important, but then I'd also like to move to, you know, what do parents do? What do children do? What do we do to educate them? So again, on any of those topics, but if you don't mind, Chris, I'll start off again with you on the getting from, okay, you
Yes.
set the stage.
Now we have your attention.
Yes, yes, undivided attention.
I think one of the big things to realize is that we have to get back to that concept that it takes a village to raise a family or a child, because the reality of it is it's not just a single parent is going to be able to watch what's happening to their own children anymore. There's teachers that are involved.
Right.
There's child care providers. There's all these other eyes that are constantly on the children. They need to be aware of what's happening. I know the Prandy Center here in Marin County is actually putting together a video for high school students that's talking about the sexting concept of who they're talking about, because it's going over that digital footprint again of, hey, when you send that picture, you send that personal information, that's going to be out there forever. Someone's going to have it.
Yeah.
There's applications like Snapchat that exist where your child could send pictures of themselves or information of themselves to another individual and they think it's deleted or it's gone. Well, when the parents go look at those phones, those images or that information they've sent is now completely erased on the child's side, but it may exist on the other side of that phone where we don't know where it is anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of paying attention to what your children are looking at is probably the biggest thing, and having conversations with them. I highly recommend to parents all the time, when you want to have a serious conversation with your child about things that they're doing, do it outside the home. Their home is kind of like their sanctuary, but their prison. When they get in trouble, they're locked up there because they're grounded. So if you go to a park and have a conversation, I think it puts parents and children on even ground, so they might be able to open up and have a conversation that's open and honest and reflects the things that are really going on in their lives, so we can prevent these kinds of abductions and illegal communications between older folks and younger teenagers.
One of the things, in listening to what you've said so far, is I cannot believe how easy this is to get tons of information, how naive probably many people are, myself included, just about how far this goes and how much this is used, and the whole science behind understanding patterns of behavior so that this information can be tracked and used by a variety of people. You know, one of the things that startled me is when people were taking digital pictures and sending them back and forth, people did not realize if you allow global tracking, then those pictures are time, date stamped.
And location.
And location.
Yeah.
So that it's very easy to, again, pick up on what you had said earlier too, that pattern,
Yes.
establishing a pattern. And I think too, what you bringing up, Chris, about having a conversation, moving from the house to another place and having children on equal footing, or where they can be more open to have a conversation and become more aware of the impact of their behavior and the risk they are inviting in by not paying attention to that. It's very, very critical. So why don't I go to you, Linda, and then
Just-
see what you could add to
just
that.
a couple of things. I think he's pretty much said it all, but be vigilant. What you also do is you tell your child, be vigilant. You're walking back and forth from school, something doesn't feel or sound right, go to the nearest responsible adult that you can see, or go to a crowd. Be vigilant. Online, if somebody is asking you to do something or asking you, to meet or to befriend something or someone, and it doesn't feel right, tell your parents. Because if the child doesn't feel that it's right, there's probably something really wrong with it. The other thing that I try and tell parents is to be ever vigilant about who the children are associating with as well, because sometimes children get into games like, well, I'll take a picture of my body and send it to you if you take a picture of your body and send it to me. And the problem with that is that once those pictures go online, they're in people's control forever. I mean, or they're out of the child's control, they're out of the parents' control, but the sexual predators, they're going to be in their library forever. They'll be circulated forever. So you also want to be very vigilant about who the children are befriending and what type of games or interests, shall we say, they have.
One of the things that's most concerning to me about these abductions and these communications are, a lot of times what I see are not necessarily these guys looking to kidnap them, throw them in the trunk, and take off. what these guys will do is they'll listen. They'll have a conversation. They'll know that maybe a parent passed away, or maybe there's a divorce in the family, or maybe the child was abused or has drug and alcohol problems. We don't know what teenagers. So they befriend these teenagers and almost represent as a boyfriend role. So it's an abduction in the sense that this guy or girl took this child with them, but sometimes that child or teenager has gone with them voluntarily because they think this person loves me. They're going to take care of me.
Pay attention.
No one's going to understand that, so that's why I'm going to leave and not tell anyone.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's basically being put in that trunk and taken off, except now they've got a traumatic bonding kind of grasp on these children. They've got that mental and emotional grip on them where they're not going to go. And maybe when law enforcement does find them, it's a lot harder to get them to understand that, no, you were a victim of something. So when things go to court, it's a lot harder to prosecute because these teenagers or children have a strong emotional or romantic bond to their captor as well.
By saying that, one of the things that struck me, and I'm thinking this is years ago, living in San Francisco with my own very young children and trying to equip them as best I can to protect themselves. But that was more against aggressive behavior.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is not necessarily the aggressive. You're talking about the less aggressive, the more subvert and playing on the emotional. So it's not. There's the physical, the abduction, and then there's the playing on emotions and understanding, the listening, and so that's the shift that I see, or the awareness that I'm getting now from what you're saying, Chris.
Right.
Yeah, and what you're saying too is that emotional bond is tough to break or to kind of educate someone who's been a victim that in fact they have been a victim.
Right. For example, we all have our first loves from when we were young kids, whether it was puppy love or what it may have been, but to some of these kids, that's exactly what these relationships start as. They believe that someone loves them, is going to care for them, so that bond grows very quickly and very intense, and it's very difficult to break once it's severed.
My goodness. Now, I'd like to, you have stories. I mean, because part of this is you've set the context, the background, and given us an idea, given me a clear idea, too, of what needs to happen. But are there some, Linda, are there some stories, or Chris, are there some stories that you can share? Because I think that helps make it real.
One story I can tell you, which happened in Southern California, involved 3 men who were in this racket, if you will, of sending emails out to befriend kids, underage girls, and they had 10 girls that they befriended. And again, smooth operators. You know, each girl thought she was special. She was a princess for the first time in her life. Someone totally understood her for the first time in her life. So they willingly took photographs of themselves. They willingly shared their innermost secrets, and in a couple of cases went to meet with the men and got sexually assaulted. At that point, they are ashamed. They're ashamed. Or in one case, they said, well, maybe this is, you know, how a relationship should be. And it was only until the 5th victim became, in fact, a victim and told her parents, the law enforcement authorities were called in and found that they had been doing this to easily over 10 or 20 girls over their period of time. And it was 3 men.
And as you said, very carefully orchestrated. It almost sounds, you know, just like a script that they followed, and it was only, and all the people they victimized until one person had the courage.
The courage,
to say, I'm a victim.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, you're talking about little kids, and they got embarrassed and humiliated, and the last people in the world, most of them wanted to tell, was their parents.
Which brings up an interesting point too, is then how we educate the children, especially this age group, but I'm sure even earlier than that, just to take care of them, to be aware of those signs.
Well, be aware, but also just, you really want to have always an open avenue of communication with your kids. You know, you want them to know there's nothing that they should be afraid of or embarrassed to tell you, that you love them above everything else. And I think if you keep that avenue of communication open, I think that's half the battle right there. And then watching this internet like a CIA agent. That's the second part of the battle.
I think that's the message I'm getting right now. Chris, what about you? what are the stories? I mean, if there's something that you can share so that people understand who are watching this program how this happens or what happens, and that it happens in your neighborhood as well. It's not just something that happens in a particular area.
Right. A lot of the things that I tend to see, we don't see a whole lot of stranger abductions in this area. It's not the most common way of things happening, but we do have a lot of runaway teenagers, a lot of runaway kids. And when you're 13 years old, you can't get a hotel room. The only place you could sleep is outside, or if you know someone who's going to shelter you that's not going to tell your parents where you're at, you have very few options of what you can do. So what happens is a lot of these teenagers will go to the streets, and then eventually within usually 24 to 48 hours, they start to get contacted by adults, whether it's for a, hey, are you okay, or someone who's going to take up an advantage of someone they know is down on their luck and needing help. That's a lot of times what we see, where a teenager will run away, and within the first 48 hours, they've been contacted by an adult, and they may be spending the night at somebody else's house that they have no idea who they are. And then from there might be the introduction of drugs or alcohol, or oftentimes these children get sexually assaulted in these same instances. It's not necessarily the abductor going to the house to take the child, it's just more of an abductor, or more like a
Opportunist,
exactly.
taking advantage of a vulnerable child.
Exactly. So we see a lot of those kinds of things where even some teenagers who come back voluntarily because they got in a fight with mom, so they left for 24 hours, we'll go back and we'll still meet with them and interview them and talk to them. But they'll say, oh yeah, while I was walking, I had 3 people pull over, and they were men that were like my dad's age, and they tried to get me to get in the car with them because they offered me a ride. And it's scary to see how many of these kids actually get in the car to get a ride, or how many 13-year-old girls think it's okay to hitchhike from one side of town to another.
Yeah.
I work in a town that's roughly 160,000 people, and it's a fairly large city, so to get from one side to the other, it's a little bit of a task, but it's not a huge city. But how many of these kids are willing to get into a car with someone and drive to Ukiah or drive to San Francisco, and they don't know that person? And from there, that's where a lot of these abductions begin. They're just opportunistic, and they come from there. So those to me are really the common things that we see outside of parental abductions or familial abductions, which are probably the most common that we deal with the police department, as well as I'm assuming the district attorney's office.
Yeah, every now and then we do have an attempted abduction. I believe like the car slows down and somebody tries to reach and grab a kid who's walking home from school. Luckily that doesn't happen very often, but in my 32, 33 years of experience, it happened, I'd say, an average of once a year at least. And luckily, in the majority of cases, the children were not actually taken into the car. Or you'll also have cases where people will be following the child, and later on you determine that they're exposing themselves and doing other things. And the child sort of just scurries away and again goes to the next group of adults or responsible adults and reports it.
That's what you want, that self-awareness.
Yes.
We are just, we only have a few minutes left, and you've really sort of set the stage and increased my awareness of the issue of child abduction, and also touched on, as you said, the vulnerability of children in a lot of different situations. In terms of your perspective, like a key point, thinking back on what you've said, Linda, what's something that you want to emphasize first, and then Chris, something you want to emphasize related to child abduction that's important for our viewing audience?
I would say it's twofold: open communication with your children and hypervigilance are my two words or passwords to this whole thing. Open communication, because your children, if they feel free to talk to you about anything, will more than likely bring up if somebody is trying to solicit them for any purpose, pictures, sex, or if their friends are getting into a game that is not healthy for the child. You'll know about that. And hypervigilance, because parents won't be the first group to not be understood by their children. I mean, this has happened since, time immemorial?
Yes.
And so it is up to the parents. I was only sort of joking about being like the CIA in terms of monitoring as much as they can where their child is going, what friends your child has, and again, what they're doing on the internet.
Thank you. And Chris, last words for
Yes.
key points on
I would agree.
this topic.
I would agree that hypervigilance is probably the big thing, whether it's real life where we get a lot of kids that will say, report to law enforcement that I had a van that was following me from school. It's done this for 3 times this week and I didn't see any other kids that I know get into the van, reporting those things, because we don't know, it could be nothing. It could be a construction worker who just leaves the same time, or it could be someone who's looking to pick up a child.
Right.
So getting that information out there is key, because nowadays we retain that information. It exists still in case something in the future happens, and just really paying attention to the internet, what's going on there, what your children are doing. Really quickly, one of the cases we recently had was somebody who was looking to pick up an underage girl who he thought I was 13 years old.
Oh, you're talking about the case of the 2 25-year-olds?
Well, no, a separate one. He
Oh,
was
a different
he was a
one.
40-year-old man who was looking to pick up an underage girl. Well, I had another person, a family, call me and says, hey, I can't believe that you found that guy, because that guy was doing the same thing to my daughter and had never gotten reported. So the thing was, is we knew this person was existing in our community, but no one did anything about it until somebody else stepped forward, and we found out that there was multiple possible victims.
So it pays to be vigilant. It also pays to inform.
Yes.
Again, the open communication
Yes.
between the parent and the child,
Yes.
and just stay on top of things. I think you have to come back and help us figure out how to be hyper vigilant again. I want to thank you very much. We're really I really appreciate the conversation we've had and you taking the time to really address this very important topic. I'd like to close by thanking our guests, Linda Witong and Chris Mahurin, and also thanking the Buck Institute for Research on Aging and our wonderful Seroptimus crew, Freda Kaplan, Patricia Hess, Barbara Madrid, our studio engineer, Leon Johnson. And an announcement that Seroptimus International of Marin is hosting a special event, Human Trafficking and Child Abduction, September 14th, 2014, noon to 5 p.m. at the Marin County Office of Education in the community room. The registration fee is $25, and this is an event that's being supported by Seroptimus International of Nevada as well. So please consider attending and becoming educated to support caring for our children and keeping them safe. Thank you.